Joanna?
Since when, after like the third time you went through it, there was emotion to it. It was like a flowing. Can that kind of flow also help place, if I have a memory, but I don't know how old I was? It can fill in. Like,
The brain starts to order things for us. And then we'll just realize, oh, that was before that, so I must have been that age. It will actually start to put things in place when we do this kind of work. Our brain starts to kind of get those things in order.
So another question, when you said when you don't know what to do a timeline, does that mean you start again?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Now, what's different about what we did today is the way that if it had gone the way we expected, we would have made the whole timeline. Then we would have said, okay, now we're going to focus on this issue of fear. So that's the presenting problem. In the present, she has issues of fear that sometimes stir up. So the presenting problem is fear. Now I want you to think about that fear. And then we would have said, Lord, is there a memory that you want to take her to that we can work on today that's related to that fear? And we talk about, so I want you to just kind of let the Lord float back, or you just kind of float back and just see what memory comes to mind. That's what we would have done if we were following the process as 217, starting on page 217. So we would have said, Lord, is there a memory related to this fear? Hopefully, he would have taken her to a childhood memory, because the earlier ones are, it's not always that, but likely he would have taken her to a childhood memory. And then we would have, that's the memory that we would have invited Jesus into. We would have asked him to show her where he was, what was happening. And then we would have done the timeline only from the age of that memory, not from the very beginning of her timeline. Okay? So let's say the Lord had her float back to a memory that's age 7. Then from then on, in that session, it's that memory and what's on the timeline after 7. Okay? It's not go all the way back here every time and come all the way through. Okay? We only did that because we had so much activation. We couldn't add fear on top of kind of what's going on.
Clear up other fears too along the way. Yeah.
The brain starts to pull in themes. And so it's not like we're going to end up having to clear every memory related to fear with this process. We'll do a couple of them, and then the brain will just catch up the others and help resolve that. Barb?
Okay, I have a question about, in reading the book, I have this understanding that healing timeline is really good for a particular trauma in someone's life. And so can you set that next to what we read this month with Living from the Heart Jesus Gave You, and they talk about trauma that is an ongoing sort of a pattern in a person's life versus trauma that is an incident that happens at a moment or a couple of moments kind of a thing. So they distinguish between the two types of trauma, and they say that the repair for each type can be a little bit different. And so healing timeline, is it just for that particular one-time trauma, or is it this sweeping, you can use it? I mean, how would you know when you sat down that you go to a one-time trauma with healing timeline as opposed to episodes throughout your life that is abuse or, something? I don't know.
Okay.
Do you understand what
I
I'm
think
asking?
I understand. Okay, so healing timeline is designed to only deal with one memory at a time. All right, and it'll be a memory that will then alternate with coming through the timeline. All right. Now, what can happen is we've got that memory that we're going to start with, and then they start to come through the timeline, and this memory was at 7, and they go, oh yeah, I remember at 12 too, and I remember at this, and I remember at this. Well, the brain is beginning to gather up the things that are on the same theme, but we don't plug all those other memories into the timeline, okay? We stay with the one. The brain will do some work on those other things, but we're not necessarily going to target a whole theme through a person's life.
Right, and that's not exactly what I'm asking, because really what I'm asking is, how do you know when you sit down and you begin this process that you're not going to end up dealing with something that had to do with a trauma that is neglect throughout a person's life, and that's a different trauma, according to the life model, than the trauma of being sexually abused
Right.
by a relative.
So here's the other piece of that. Lifespan integration deals with neglect through a lifetime, because neglect through a lifetime requires that things be put in that were not
Right,
there.
exactly.
Okay? So lifespan integration, or a lifespan integration person, could use the timeline to do that, but what this is designed for is not going to be that neglect kind of thing. It's going to be more that specific memory that can be dealt with.
So then back to the question, how do you know at the moment that you're dealing with your ministry receiver that you're, and you're wanting to use a timeline, that you're going to go to a place that is a traumatic memory that's not a long-term neglect sort of thing?
So there are two ways that you know what memory you'll be working with in healing timeline. Okay? One is they have a traumatic memory and it bothers them and they want to work on that
And
memory.
that's why they're.
Right. And so they come to have a healing timeline session because they want to work on a memory that's troublesome. Okay? So we know right away we're starting with that one memory. And we're only going to use the timeline and the ages after that memory. Okay? So we'll work with that. Okay, then the other way that we find a memory is we ask the Lord and He floats them back to a memory. Okay? So now here's the presenting problem. It's fear or it's conflict in a relationship. Here's my presenting problem today. Now, Lord, what memory do you want us to work on? And it may not feel like to the person they're related at all. But we don't tell the Lord, no, that's the wrong memory, give us another one. You know. So then we just say, here's the presenting problem. Now, Lord, what memory do you want us to work on? What is this related to? And that's the other way that we end up in a memory. So in those two cases, I don't really have to, make a decision. But what I do have to make sure is that when the brain begins to bring these that are on the same theme, I don't add those in.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
Now, what do you do when someone can't come up with a memory? You're asking the Lord to go to your memory, and they don't have one.
Uh-huh.
They're not coming up with one. Then where do you go?
I will, questions? How many of you have been in YouTube, and of course the year 2 people, who else has been in one of my timeline or visual timeline trainings? Okay, that's right. Okay. All right. You had a question?
Yeah. When you feel like, I guess the answer is probably feel like the person is not activated enough. I mean, too much, but you had a sense for when to ask if God was saying anything to her. And at one point during the last couple timelines, it seemed like you not be asking, sorry, where you were bringing back in what God had said.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed like they were like about 10 years apart at one point, and then you actually went all the way through the timeline without reminding her, bringing that back in. So I was wondering how you know, just since the Holy Spirit tells you, or something from what you're seeing?
If he has said something, it's basically what I feel like the Holy Spirit is leading me, and it's not a very common thing. That's not necessary to bring that in, but there was one of the memories that was on her timeline at that point. I think I felt like I just felt impressed to bring it in, because whatever that memory was, it's like, this is a good time to remember that the Lord said He's always been with her. And so I just kind of brought it in at that point. It's like, okay, now just take a minute and remember that the Lord said He's always been there, and then, went on from there. But that's not a part, that's not a part of the healing timeline to intersperse those remembrances. But I did it because I felt like it would be a good place to remember what the Lord had said. Okay? Is anybody like thoroughly confused? Are you guys okay? Is everybody okay? Okay. Ralph?
I just wanted to comment on, early on after the first timeline, you telegraphed that you were going to be asking if the Lord was revealing any memories. And that's just part of your gentleness. To structure that in, you're actually sequencing that in to a sequencing that's going on. And getting that flow, which is what the timeline does, is it puts, as you said, looking at our timelines establishes us and we settle into a sequence. So it's meant to do that. And then the gentle nuances that you as a counselor put into it. Everybody's going to have their own way of doing it. It's not set and tried and true, which I think are some of the other things that as you started to repeat, you were going off of what you were given to do that. If somebody were to come up with something that was an activation and it was something that needed to be zeroed in on, you would have zeroed in on that age and then sharpened it from that age.
Right, that's right. And the thing about kind of telegraphing to her, I felt like it would be good to give her a little bit of time. I mean, the other way I could do it, and I sometimes do this, but I could wait until we got to the end and then just said, Lord, is there anything you want her to know? But I just felt like she needed some lead time. So I'm going to do this. We're going to head toward this. We're going to ask the Lord. If it's just quiet, that's fine. But I just felt like in this particular situation, it would be good for her to know where we were headed and that we were maybe going to listen to the Lord here in a moment, and she could be ready for that.
I would think in integrating the Lord's always been with you would cause relief. Does it bring like an assurance and relief?
So, I'm sitting here listening to all this, but the Lord's still processing, like you said, it keeps going, I'm still processing. But, one thing I know is I thought in my life that I was doing what I needed to do, and I sought the Lord a lot about that situation that I cried about. So, when the Lord said, I was with you all along, to me that said, reaffirm that he was with me all along. Because I became a Christian when I was 6 years old, and I remember knowing that the God was with me always, and I couldn't do things before doing it because the Lord, I would feel like I can't do that. That's not what God let me do. My entire life, I felt that way. So that reminded me that he was with me all along. But at the end, he said to me that you couldn't have done it differently. And it made me think, I remember seeking him and doing what he said to do, even when people didn't think I should do it that way. And just remember that he told me certain things I could do, I could not do, and I did them. And I remember thinking, I'm doing this even though it's not normal to, like, one thing was don't go and seek out and tell people what's happening. Wait till people come to you. I want you not to try to put out fires. I will take care of it. And that was the hardest thing, to not defend myself in some areas. And it's been 15 years, and people are coming to me now after 15 years still, and where I wanted to go put out a fire and didn't. And it was like, now the truth is there. But I'm just saying, it just reaffirmed to me that you couldn't have done anything different, and you don't have to go back and try to fix the things you aren't sure of. And I just kept hearing that you don't have to keep trying to go back and figure out what you could have done better and fix it now. That's all done, just be done. And it was huge. And it's a theme throughout a couple of different things.
And that was what you heard in the third time, right? That was when we were finishing
You don't have to go
that
back and
fifth.
fix it. It's all done, and
You don't have to go back and
couldn't
fix
have done
it.
differently, so don't feel guilty and bad about it. You just couldn't have done it.
And could you hear that and receive it today
Yeah,
in a different way than before?
absolutely. Yes. Yeah, I think if we'd have dealt with fear like we talked about, it wouldn't have done anything like this did. I just knew I needed that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank Good.
The feeling you set forward,
Uh-huh.
that was something else I thought.
Okay.
That might be something.
Yeah, and we don't generally comfort, you know, I mean, we would pat a knee, we would touch, you know, and so we don't do that as a part, but when a person is activated, if I make this space a little bit smaller for them, then they feel safer.
I did.
And so when I came in here, let's just make it this space right here instead of all of this room, you know. So that was intentional.
I kind of forgot we had people watching.
Mhm.
I mean, I really did in that.
Yes.
I kind of forgot everybody was watching.
Oh, good, you forgot. Okay. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Okay.
you were more present, and when you just kind of encapsulated presence, like holding the space.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that was the goal. Good.
I'm thinking back to a time when I went to Price Center for a sozo, and there was several people in the room, and one didn't say anything but wrote stuff down. And because when she was going through this, the Lord ministered a couple things to me. And right before she said, the Lord said, "I've always been with you," I heard that from a previous encounter that I'd had when this gal was ministering, and I could hear my friend's voice saying, "I've always been with you, I've always been with you." And I thought, oh, that's for her. And then you said, "I've always been with you." So that might be, is that fine to have someone else in the room that just might be taking notes about what they hear from the Lord, and then at the end, put that in?
Yes, so depending on the structure that you're following, having someone in the room or being a team that does this, absolutely, that can be part of timeline ministry. I mean, you guys can speak to that because you do that regularly. And then the only sort of caveat is that the client needs to be comfortable. If that's the way it's set up and they know they're coming and they're going to be two people there, that's great. Since I generally do work by myself, if I was going to have anyone else there, I would get permission from that person before I had someone else, had someone else be there. Or I would let them bring someone that they wanted to have with them.
Yeah.
But yes, absolutely, there can be.
And even if the person doesn't say anything but writes down.
Writes
and
down.
At the end, after the whole thing, says, "This is what I heard."
Praise, yes.
Mm-hmm. For further insight.
Yes. Did you guys want to say something? Either of you?
Not in regards to this, do you want to speak into that?
Oh, I just agree with that, and at the end, giving it to them, so that it's something that, years later, or whatever, they can continue to reflect on that, so, yeah.
How when we're doing healing timeline together, and it's funny because we just bounce back and forth. It's not like, okay, you're gonna do it, Celine. It just kind of organically happens. Who's gonna be the one ministering to the person? So whoever's not the one doing the timeline, that person, the other person is recording what God is saying to that person, so that they have something. And you can, by also asking the evaluation of the emotion, you have again, okay, when we did the first healing timeline, you were at an 8 with your emotion, and then you have it after the second and third. So there's again that recording of it that the Lord will continue to minister to them, and also have, as this is the word that that the Lord gave you, and just to keep letting that go through their head.
Yes. I generally will, whenever I have asked something of the Lord in that session, I'll just put on the notes that I'm working, I'll just put Lord with a question mark, and then write out whatever he says. And then when I hand them that piece of paper, sometimes I'll circle the Lord before I hand it to them. Here's the things. So yes, being able to hand that back to them and kind of come up with our own little shorthand for how it's going to be the most meaningful to them to give them. Yes, ma'am?
Just one other thing. So when you were saying about how God was telling you couldn't have done it any different, I think it's really precious when I acknowledge, because when we started, you guys were here saying that, I think it was you, Heather, we can't do it wrong. We can't, we didn't do it wrong.
Right.
So it
That's
was
right.
to me like this preparation of the word that the Lord was going to give to you.
That's good.
I wanted to say too, like healing, because I had emotion, a good emotion, and not that I didn't have in the beginning.
Mhm.
So that was kind of interesting too.
Yeah,
I was
uh-huh.
like, that was kind of funny.
I-
And then I got to the other part, and it's like, oh, I just kind of didn't cry about that. So it kind of changed. It wasn't
Yes,
exactly-
and that's common. That is common when some of the things that are really sad or really difficult, when they do begin to get integrated, then we'll have some of those other, the emotion itself can change in the process. So that's good. I'm
And I
glad you did
just,
that.
when you're just saying that, I remember during that time where it's like, I remember being very numb, and at the end of that saying, I don't ever laugh, but I don't cry. But now I cry a lot. And so
Yes.
it's like, that, it's like that's healing, so,
Mhm.
yeah.
Good.
But part of that is crying over and getting over it. You know, that's it. Yeah.
Right. Joanna and then Terry. Okay, go ahead.
When you said the brain learns that it's not really happening anymore,
Yeah.
so is that the integration, like you're not reliving it, instead of working memory, it goes into like long-term memory, or just a different place?
You will generally still have the memory. I mean, it'll still be there, but you'll remember different things about it. Like you'll remember what happened at the end of it when something good happened, or you won't have the emotion of what was there while we were trying to resolve it. So, and it won't be charged. There won't be any emotional charge in it. So you still remember what happened. You may remember something that you had forgotten that was actually good, and then you won't have emotional charge in it. That's what generally happens when you get to work on that specific memory and then alternating with the timeline in a session.
Okay, I think
It loses its emotional charge. You still remember what happened.
yeah, so it's
Yeah.
not, you're not reliving it.
Right, it's not triggered.
And then the emotion with it too, it doesn't, that too is lessened as well.
So say if even now, if you have a memory, but you don't really feel anything about it, it's just a memory, and maybe it doesn't need healing?
Right, it could not need healing if
Or
you,
it could be numb.
or it could be numb. I'm glad you said that. I was going to have to say it, but yeah, you said it.
Well, there's just some things that are curious. Why is that memory there, but I'm not really having a context? So that would help.
So either possibly there's already been a measure of healing to it that we didn't know about, God just did, or it could be numb. And if that's the case, then likely if a session was done on it, then the Lord would open it up. I think sometimes He lets us stay numb so we can stay safe.
Yeah.
And if it was something that we can't really deal with ourselves or it's too overwhelming, then timing. Okay, we'll do you, and then I think we probably need to go to lunch, Terry, or take our lunch break.
Okay, two questions. One is, you said sometimes you check to see where they're at, like on a scale of 1 to 10.
Mhm.
What would you say?
Well, what will I say when I ask
Yeah,
that?
what would you say, and would it be like at the end of the timeline when you ask that?
I know it will be when they first get activated. So like if we know that we're going to be dealing with fear, and I'll ask them, can you feel that anywhere in your body? Can you feel that, as we talk about fear, can you kind of feel that? And then if they do, I may say like, so 0 to 10, how intense is that? It's always an intensity question. 0 to 10, how intense is that? Now, if someone is sitting in front of me crying, then it's a 10 or more, so I'm not necessarily going to use it. But if it's, if we start talking about fear, and I say, do you kind of feel that fear while we're talking about it? And yes. And so how intense is that sense of fear that you're feeling right now? It's about a 7. Okay, well, that's pretty high. Let's go ahead and, start working with the memory or working through the timeline, whichever place we are, because we're always going to alternate back and forth between those two. And then when we come back, so we found out we're going to talk about fear, and then we're asking the Lord where the memory is, the intensity of the fear. We've kind of made a note of. Now we come through the timeline, and then when we go back and check it again, You know, so when you think about fear now, when you think about the memory, or when you think about fear now, how intense is that fear now? Oh, it's like about a 3. Okay, good. We're getting, we're making progress. So most of the time we're able to come down to a 0. It's rare that it jumps back and forth. Like usually if it starts coming down, it's going to keep coming down. So it's not like it's a 7, now it's a 9, now it's a 6, Usually once we start coming down. Occasionally it might, but not very often. Usually you start to get that relief.
You were saying about lifespan integration by in case on her website, who can go through that training?
It's only master's level therapists or licensed counselors is what it's for.